The auction begins. The room was filled with the scent of luxury, fresh roses, exotic perfumes, and a faint hint of champagne. High ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers shimmered as laughter and murmurs of the wealthy elite filled the grand ballroom. This was no ordinary night. It was a charity auction held to raise funds for underprivileged children. The city's elite were out in full force, eager to flaunt their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. Keanu Reeves stood quietly in the corner, dressed in his signature understated style. A simple black suit, and a tie that looked like it had been tied in a rush. His calm demeanor sharply contrasted with the exuberance around him. He wasn't there to impress anyone. His purpose was clear: to contribute, not to mingle. Most people in the room didn't even notice him. That is, until one sharp voice cut through the air. Keanu Reeves. Here. In that suit? A woman's voice, dripping with sarcasm, turned heads. The speaker was Vivienne Leclerc, a renowned socialite known for her biting comments and her penchant for being the center of attention. She was draped in an evening gown that shimmered as if it had been woven with diamonds. Her lips curled into a smirk as she waved her champagne flute toward Keanu. He looked up, his calm eyes meeting hers without a hint of annoyance. "Good evening," he said softly, giving her a polite nod. Vivienne chuckled, loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "Good evening. That's all you've got. I thought the great Keanu Reeves would be more charming. Tell me, are you here to bid or just observe?" Her tone was mocking, and a few people nearby exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Keanu didn't flinch. "I'm here to support the cause," he replied, his voice steady. "The children deserve every bit of help we can give." Vivienne tilted her head, clearly unimpressed. "Admirable," she said, the word laced with sarcasm. "But you do realize this is an auction, don't you? Supporting means bidding. Big. Do you think you're ready to play in the big leagues tonight?" The room was silent now, all eyes on the unexpected confrontation. Keanu's lips curved into a faint smile. "I'll do my best," he said simply. Vivienne's laughter rang out again. "Oh, how noble. Let's see if Hollywood's Mr. Humble can actually back up his words." The auction began shortly after, with the auctioneer's voice booming across the hall. The first few items: a rare painting, a vintage watch, a private yacht tour, went for astronomical sums, with Vivienne leading several bidding wars and emerging victorious. She made sure to cast a smug glance at Keanu each time she won. But Keanu remained quiet, watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. He didn't bid on anything, yet. Then, the highlight of the evening was unveiled: a custom-built community center for underprivileged children, complete with classrooms, a library, and a playground. The auctioneer explained that the funds raised would directly cover construction and operational costs for 3 years. The bidding started high, and it escalated quickly. Vivienne, as expected, was in the lead. $1 million, she declared with a dramatic wave of her paddle. $2 million, someone countered. Vivienne smirked. $3 million. The room buzzed with excitement as the numbers climbed. Vivienne's confidence grew with every bid she outlasted, until it was down to just her and one other bidder, a tech mogul sitting across the room. $5 million, the mogul said, leaning back in his chair. Vivienne didn't hesitate. $6 million. There was a pause. The mogul hesitated before shaking his head and lowering his paddle. A satisfied Vivienne turned to the crowd, soaking in their applause. $6 million, she announced, as if the auctioneer's confirmation wasn't enough. Anything for the children. But just as the gavel was about to fall, a calm voice broke through the applause. $7 million. The room turned in unison to see Keanu, standing with his paddle raised. His expression was calm, almost serene. Vivienne's smile faltered. $7 million, she repeated, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. "Are you serious?" Keanu met her gaze. "It's for the children," he said simply. The auctioneer, sensing the tension, jumped in. We have 7 million. Do I hear 8? Vivian's cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone she had mocked just moments ago. 8 million, she said, her voice sharp. 10 million, Keanu replied without missing a beat. The crowd gasped. All eyes were now on the unexpected showdown. Vivian hesitated. 10 million was an outrageous sum, even for her, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. 10.5, she said, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Keanu raised his paddle again. 15 million. The room erupted in murmurs. Even the auctioneer seemed momentarily stunned before recovering. 15 million. Going once, going twice. Wait, Vivian's voice cracked. She stood, her face a mix of disbelief and frustration. This is absurd. 15 million for a community center. That's just overkill. Keanu turned to her, his expression soft but firm. Can you put a price on hope? On giving children a chance to dream, to learn, to grow. His voice carried through the room, silencing the whispers. 15 million is a small price to pay for a future. The auctioneer seized the moment. 15 million going once, going twice. Sold. To Mr. Keanu Reeves. The room erupted in applause, but Keanu barely acknowledged it. He walked over to Vivian, who stood frozen, her pride in tatters. Thank you for pushing me to do more, he said quietly. Your passion for the cause is inspiring. And with that, he walked away, leaving Vivian and the entire room speechless. This was only the beginning. What no one knew was that this single act of generosity would spark a chain of events that would change countless lives, including Vivian's, in ways they never imagined. The ripple effect. The applause from the auction still echoed in Vivian's mind as she sat in the back of her sleek limousine, staring out at the city lights. The humiliation burned deeper than she expected. Vivian Leclerc, the queen of high society, had been publicly outbid and outclassed, not just financially, but in spirit. She replayed Keanu's words in her head. Can you put a price on hope? For the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't anger or embarrassment. It was self-reflection. But Vivian Leclerc wasn't one to wallow. She decided that the best way to salvage her pride was to take action. If Keanu Reeves thought he could outshine her, she would prove she could do more than flaunt her wealth. She would use it. That night, Vivian made a phone call that would set a chain of events into motion. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves was walking back to his modest downtown apartment. The night air was crisp, and the buzz of the city felt alive. Despite the stares and whispers from passersby, he moved like a shadow, unassuming, grounded. When he arrived home, he found his phone buzzing incessantly. News outlets had already picked up on his record-breaking bid. Headlines like Hollywood star outbids socialite for charity project and Keanu Reeves donates $15 million to build hope flooded the internet. But Keanu didn't care for the noise. He wasn't interested in accolades. He just wanted to ensure the project would make a difference. The following day, he called the director of the charity, a woman named Sarah Miller. Sarah was a no-nonsense philanthropist with a heart as big as her ambition. She'd been fighting for years to get this community center off the ground, and Keanu's contribution had turned her dream into a reality overnight. Mr. Reeves, Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion when she answered his call. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't have to, Keanu replied. But I'd like to visit the site. I want to see how we can make this as impactful as possible. Sarah agreed, and the following week, they met at the proposed site, a rundown lot in the heart of the city. The area was rough, with broken streetlights and graffiti-covered walls. Children played soccer with a deflated ball, their laughter cutting through the otherwise bleak surroundings. This is where we'll build it, Sarah said, her eyes shining with hope. It's not much now, but with your help, it'll be a sanctuary for these kids. Keanu nodded, taking in the scene. Let's make it happen, he said. As they discussed plans, a small boy approached them, his clothes tattered but his smile bright. "Are you going to build something here?" he asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. Keanu crouched down to his level. "Yes, we're going to build a place where you can learn and play and dream big." The boy grinned. "Will there be books?" "Lots of books," Keanu promised. "And maybe a soccer field." Keanu chuckled. "Definitely a soccer field." The boy ran off, shouting the news to his friends, and Keanu felt a warmth in his chest. This was why he had done it. Not for the headlines or the applause, but for moments like this. Back in her penthouse, Vivian was scrolling through social media, watching as the world fawned over Keanu's generosity. The more she read, the more it gnawed at her. She wasn't used to being overshadowed, but beneath the frustration, something else stirred, a sense of admiration she couldn't quite admit to herself. Vivian wasn't one to let others dictate the narrative, so she called her assistant. "Get me Sarah Miller's contact information," she said. "Sarah Miller? The charity director?" her assistant asked, surprised. "Yes, and make it quick." 2 days later, Sarah was surprised to find Vivian Leclerc waiting at her office. The socialite looked every bit the picture of wealth and power, but her demeanor was different. She seemed earnest. "Ms. Leclerc," Sarah greeted her cautiously. "This is unexpected. I wanted to talk to you about the community center," Vivian said, cutting straight to the point. "I want to help." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were already a supporter." "I am," Vivian said, shifting in her seat. "But I want to do more. I've been thinking about what Mr. Reeves said, about hope. And he's right. It's not just about writing a check. It's about creating something meaningful. I want to partner with you on this project." Sarah was skeptical. She'd seen plenty of wealthy donors who wanted their names on buildings but weren't interested in the hard work. "What kind of partnership are we talking about?" "I want to fund a scholarship program," Vivian said, surprising even herself. "For the kids who come to the center. I'll cover their education costs, whatever it takes to give them a real chance." Sarah leaned back, studying her. "Why the sudden interest?" Vivian hesitated. "Let's just say I have something to prove." Over the next few months, the project took on a life of its own. Keanu and Vivian, an unlikely duo, found themselves working side by side. While their personalities couldn't have been more different, they shared a common goal: to create a space that would transform lives. Keanu focused on the practical aspects, ensuring the center had state-of-the-art facilities and resources. He spent hours at the site, helping with construction and even reading to the kids who stopped by to watch the progress. Vivian, meanwhile, used her influence to rally other donors and secure additional funding. She hosted galas and charity events, pouring her energy into the cause. To everyone's surprise, she even rolled up her sleeves and volunteered at the site, helping with everything from painting walls to planting trees. As the months went by, the community center began to take shape. It wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of hope, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together. One evening, as the sun set over the nearly completed center, Keanu and Vivian stood on the rooftop, looking out at the city skyline. "You've changed," Keanu said, breaking the silence. Vivian smirked. "Don't get used to it." He chuckled. "I mean it. This isn't the same Vivian Leclerc I met at the auction." She sighed, her expression softening. "Maybe I needed someone to remind me what really matters." Keanu nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You've done good, Vivian." "So have you," she replied. "But don't think I'm done yet. I still have a few tricks up my sleeve." The center's grand opening was just around the corner, but neither of them knew that the impact of their work would extend far beyond the community. Lives were about to change in ways they couldn't imagine. And so would their own. A dream takes flight. The grand opening of the community center was just days away, and the excitement in the neighborhood was palpable. Children peeked through the construction fences, their wide eyes lighting up at the colorful murals that now adorned the once bleak walls. Parents, many of whom had struggled to keep their kids safe and occupied, couldn't stop talking about how this new place would change everything. For Keanu Reeves, the sight of it all was humbling. He stood in the middle of the freshly paved courtyard, watching as workers put the final touches on the playground. A soccer field stretched out to one side, and on the other, a garden area was being filled with flowers planted by local families. Inside, classrooms were being stocked with books, art supplies, and brand new computers. But the highlight was the library, a stunning room with high ceilings, sunlight streaming through tall windows, and shelves that seemed to stretch forever. It was the heart of the center, a place designed to inspire curiosity and learning. Keanu walked inside and found Sarah Miller sitting on the floor, unpacking boxes of books. "I didn't expect to find the director doing the heavy lifting," he said with a warm smile. Sarah laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'd be surprised what you end up doing in this job. Besides, it's not every day you get to build a dream from scratch." Keanu crouched down to help her. "You're the real hero here, Sarah. None of this would have happened without you." She looked at him, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "And it wouldn't have been possible without you either. You didn't just write a check, you showed up. That means more than you know." Across town, Vivian Leclerc was preparing for one of the most ambitious events of her career, a charity gala to raise additional funds for the scholarship program she had launched in conjunction with the community center. The program, which she'd named Dream Beyond, aimed to provide full educational support for underprivileged kids, covering everything from school supplies to college tuition. The gala was her way of ensuring the program didn't just survive, it thrived. But it was also a chance to show the world that Vivian Leclerc was more than just a socialite with a sharp tongue. Her assistant, Amanda, stood beside her as they reviewed the final guest list. "We've got tech billionaires, Hollywood A-listers, and even a few politicians," Amanda said. "This is going to be the event of the year." Vivian nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought back to her first meeting with Keanu and how his quiet determination had ignited something inside her. For years, she had lived for the applause, the headlines, and the accolades. But now, she realized, the only applause that mattered was the kind you couldn't hear, the silent gratitude of the kids whose lives they were about to change. As the night of the gala arrived, the ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel was transformed into a shimmering spectacle of gold and silver. Guests arrived in their finest attire, their laughter and chatter filling the air. But for all the glamour, Vivian's speech was the true highlight of the evening. She stepped onto the stage, her usual confidence tempered with a rare vulnerability. "When I first got involved with this project," she began, "I thought it was about writing a check and calling it a day. But someone showed me that true change requires more than money. It requires heart, commitment, and action." She glanced at Keanu, who sat in the front row, his expression as calm and supportive as ever. "This community center isn't just a building. It's a promise that every child deserves a chance to dream beyond their circumstances. And tonight, I'm asking all of you to help us keep that promise." The applause was thunderous, and by the end of the night, the gala had raised over $10 million, enough to expand the scholarship program to include mentorships, internships, and extracurricular activities. The grand opening of the community center was an unforgettable day. Families poured in from all over the city, their excitement contagious. Children squealed with delight as they explored the playground, while parents marveled at the state-of-the-art facilities. Keanu and Vivian stood side by side as Sarah led the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Today, we're not just opening a building," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. "We're opening a door to opportunity, to hope, and to a brighter future for every child in this community." The ribbon was cut, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Keanu spent the day interacting with families, playing soccer with the kids, and even reading stories in the library. Vivian, for her part, surprised everyone by rolling up her sleeves and helping serve food at the community lunch. As the day wound down, Keanu found himself sitting on a bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. A little girl approached him, holding a book she had checked out from the library. "Thank you," she said softly, clutching the book to her chest. Keanu smiled. "For what?" "For building this place. It's really nice." He leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "You're welcome. But you know what? This place is yours now. So take care of it, okay?" She nodded solemnly before running off to join her friends. That evening, Keanu, Vivian, and Sarah gathered on the rooftop of the center, looking out at the neighborhood below. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but it was the laughter and chatter of the families below that filled the air. "You've done something incredible here," Vivian said, breaking the silence. "Both of you." "We've all done something incredible," Sarah replied, "and this is just the beginning." Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This place isn't just for the kids. It's for all of us, a reminder that we're stronger when we stand together." For Vivian, those words carried a weight she hadn't expected. For the first time in her life, she felt part of something bigger than herself, something real. As the three of them stood there, the sound of laughter rising from the courtyard below, they knew that the community center wasn't just a building. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of kindness and collaboration. And though the journey had been unexpected, it was far from over. Seeds of change. The grand opening of the community center marked a turning point, not just for the neighborhood, but for everyone involved. Keanu Reeves had always believed in the power of quiet kindness, but this project had awakened something deeper in him. For Vivian Leclerc, the experience had been transformative in ways she couldn't yet articulate. And for Sarah Miller, the center's director, it was a culmination of years of hard work and an opportunity to dream even bigger. It was a crisp morning a month after the center opened, and the community was already buzzing with activity. The laughter of children echoed from the playground, while inside the center, the library was filled with young readers. Parents gathered in the courtyard, sharing stories over coffee as they watched their kids explore the new space. Keanu arrived early that day, as he often did, slipping in unnoticed and blending into the flow of the center. He made his way to the soccer field, where a group of kids were practicing drills under the guidance of a volunteer coach. Among them was a boy named Louis, who had caught Keanu's attention during the opening ceremony. Louis was small for his age, but his determination was fierce. Every time he fell, he got up. Every missed kick was followed by another attempt. Keanu admired that spirit. It reminded him of his own struggles when he was younger. "Hey, Louis," Keanu called, stepping onto the field. The boy looked up, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Mr. Reeves, are you going to play with us?" Keanu laughed. "Only if you let me join your team." Louis puffed out his chest, clearly proud. "We'd love to have you." The rest of the kids gathered around, excited to have a celebrity in their midst. But Keanu didn't act like a star. He became one of them, kicking the ball, cheering their efforts, and offering encouragement. By the end of the game, the kids were laughing so hard they could barely stand. While Keanu was on the field, Vivian was in the library, flipping through a stack of notebooks. She had been overseeing the scholarship program she'd launched, personally reviewing applications to ensure no deserving child was overlooked. Her assistant, Amanda, stood nearby, holding a clipboard. "These kids are incredible," Vivian said, her voice softer than usual. "Their stories, the things they've overcome, it's humbling." Amanda nodded. "It's amazing how much potential they have when given the right support." Vivian paused, staring out the window at the families gathered outside. "You know, I used to think success was about how much money you had, how many people knew your name. But these kids, they're redefining what success means for me." Amanda smiled. "You've changed, Vivian." Vivian didn't respond immediately. Instead, she ran her fingers over the edge of one of the notebooks. "Maybe I have," she said quietly. Later that afternoon, Sarah called an impromptu meeting with Keanu and Vivian in her office. She was practically glowing with excitement. "I've been thinking," Sarah began, spreading out a series of sketches and blueprints on her desk. "The community center has been a huge success, but what if we could do more?" Keanu leaned in, studying the drawings. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to expand," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Not just this center, but to other neighborhoods that need it just as much. We could create a network of centers, each tailored to the needs of its community." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "That sounds ambitious." "It is," Sarah admitted, "but we've already proven that it's possible. The demand is there, and with the right support, we can replicate this success." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "It's a big undertaking, but I think you're right. If we can help more communities, we should." Vivian tapped her manicured nails against the desk, her mind racing. "If we're going to do this, we need a strategy. We can't just build these centers and hope for the best. We need sustainable funding, partnerships with local businesses, and a way to measure our impact." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly why I called you two here. I need your expertise, Keanu, your vision and hands-on approach, and Vivian, your connections and strategic thinking. Together, we can make this happen." Over the next few weeks, the trio dove headfirst into planning. Keanu focused on the design of the centers, ensuring they were welcoming and functional. He spent hours visiting other neighborhoods, talking to residents, and gathering input on what they needed most. Vivian, meanwhile, threw herself into fundraising. She hosted lavish events, met with corporate leaders, and even pitched the idea to government officials. Her reputation as a savvy socialite gave her access to doors that had long been closed to charities like Sarah's. But it wasn't just about the money. Vivian took a personal interest in the project, visiting the original community center regularly to connect with the families. She read to the kids, helped them with their homework, and listened to their stories. It was a side of her that few had ever seen, and it surprised even herself. One day, as she was helping a young girl named Sophia with her math homework, the girl looked up at her and said, "You're really nice, Miss Vivian." Vivian smiled, her chest tightening with an unfamiliar warmth. "Thank you, Sophia. That means a lot." As the months passed, the first phase of the expansion began. 2 new centers were planned, one in a struggling rural town and another in an underserved urban area. The projects were met with enthusiasm from the communities, and construction began almost immediately. But the journey wasn't without challenges. There were logistical hurdles, funding gaps, and moments of doubt. Keanu and Vivian found themselves stretched thin, balancing their work with their personal lives. Yet, through it all, they leaned on each other and on Sarah, whose unwavering passion kept them motivated. One evening, after a particularly long day, Keanu and Vivian found themselves sitting on the steps of the original community center. The moon cast a soft glow over the courtyard, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "I didn't think this would be so personal," Vivian admitted, staring at the stars. "When I first got involved, it was about proving something. But now, it's different." Keanu nodded. "It has a way of getting under your skin. When you see the impact, when you meet the people you're helping, it changes you." Vivian glanced at him, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Do you ever feel like, maybe this is what you were meant to do?" He smiled, his eyes warm. "Every day." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared mission settling between them. They both knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but they also knew that it was worth it. Together, they had planted the seeds of change, and together, they would see them grow. Trials of the heart. The expansion projects for the new community centers were well underway, but with progress came challenges, ones that tested the resolve and determination of everyone involved. What started as a dream to replicate the success of the first center quickly turned into a battle against unforeseen obstacles. For Keanu, Vivian and Sarah, the stakes had never been higher. It was a rainy afternoon when Keanu arrived at the urban site of the second community center. The construction was supposed to be in full swing, but when he stepped onto the muddy lot, he was met with an eerie silence. Workers stood in clusters, their faces etched with worry. "What's going on?" Keanu asked, approaching the site manager, a burly man named Tom. Tom sighed, wiping rain off his clipboard. "It's the permits. Some bureaucratic nonsense is holding things up. The city's building department wants additional inspections, and they've frozen our work until it's sorted out." Keanu frowned. "How long will this take?" Tom shrugged. "Weeks, maybe months. And if we don't fix it soon, we'll lose funding from some of the corporate sponsors. They don't like delays." Keanu's jaw tightened. He had expected challenges, but not ones that could jeopardize the entire project. "I'll handle it," he said, determination in his voice. But as he left the site, Keanu knew it wouldn't be that simple. He wasn't a politician or a businessman. Navigating red tape wasn't his forte. Still, he resolved to do whatever it took to get things back on track. Meanwhile, Vivian was facing her own set of difficulties. The rural community center, located in a small town hours away from the city, had hit a different snag: resistance from the locals. Vivian had driven out to the town, determined to understand the problem. She arrived at a town hall meeting, where residents had gathered to voice their concerns. The room was tense, filled with murmurs and suspicious glances. "We don't need some fancy city folks coming in here and telling us how to live," one man said, his arms crossed over his chest. "This community center is just going to bring in outsiders and change our way of life." Vivian stood at the front of the room, dressed in simple slacks and a blouse, a far cry from her usual designer attire. She listened patiently, taking in the residents' fears and frustrations. When the room quieted, she stepped forward. "I understand your concerns," she began, her voice steady. "And I know it might feel like we're imposing. But this isn't about changing your way of life. It's about giving your kids a safe place to learn and grow. It's about investing in your future." A woman in the back stood up. "And what's in it for you? People like you don't do things out of the goodness of your heart." Vivian hesitated, the words cutting deeper than she expected. But then she thought of the kids she had met at the first community center, the ones whose lives had already been transformed. "What's in it for me?" she repeated, her voice soft. "I suppose it's the hope that I'm doing something meaningful with my life. That maybe, for once, I'm using my privilege to make a real difference." The room fell silent. Vivian could see the doubt in their eyes, but also a glimmer of curiosity. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. While Vivian worked to win over the rural town and Keanu navigated the red tape in the city, Sarah faced an entirely different kind of challenge. A journalist had published an article questioning the financial transparency of the charity, alleging that funds were being mismanaged. The accusations were baseless, but the damage was done. Donors began pulling out, and the media frenzy threatened to overshadow everything they had accomplished. Keanu and Vivian met with Sarah in her office, where she sat at her desk, her usually confident demeanor shaken. "This could ruin us," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've worked so hard, and now it feels like it's all falling apart." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this. We just need to be transparent and prove them wrong." Vivian nodded. "I'll call some of the donors and try to reassure them. We can also organize a press conference to address the allegations head-on." Sarah looked at them, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." In the days that followed, the trio worked tirelessly to combat the challenges. Keanu met with city officials, using his calm persistence to push the permit issues forward. It wasn't easy. He spent hours in waiting rooms, made countless phone calls, and even attended city council meetings. But his sincerity and determination eventually won them over. Vivian returned to the rural town, spending time with the locals and involving them in the planning process. She listened to their ideas and concerns, ensuring they felt like partners rather than bystanders. Slowly but surely, their resistance began to soften. Sarah organized the press conference, where she, Keanu, and Vivian stood together to address the allegations. They presented clear financial records and shared heartfelt stories of the lives they had already changed. By the end, even the most skeptical reporters seemed moved. Despite the setbacks, progress resumed. The urban site finally received its permits, and construction picked up speed. The rural town not only accepted the project but began contributing to it, with local residents volunteering their time and skills. Donations poured back in as the media turned its attention to the positive impact of the community centers. One evening, Keanu, Vivian, and Sarah sat together in the courtyard of the original center, watching the sunset. They were exhausted but relieved, knowing they had overcome some of the toughest challenges yet. "You know," Vivian said, breaking the silence, "when this all started, I thought I was doing it to prove something. But now, it feels like this is what I was meant to do." Sarah smiled. "It's funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the things we least expect end up being the most important." Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This isn't just about building centers. It's about building hope. And hope, that's worth fighting for." As the last rays of sunlight faded, the three of them sat in quiet camaraderie, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew the journey was far from over, but they also knew they wouldn't face it alone. The unseen battle. The community centers were finally taking shape, and the air was alive with hope. Yet, for all the progress, an unseen battle was brewing. A battle within the hearts of Keanu, Vivian, and Sarah. The trials they had faced had taken their toll. And now, as the dust began to settle, deeper questions arose. What did this mission truly mean to each of them? And what were they willing to sacrifice to see it through? Keanu stood at the edge of the soccer field at the original community center, watching a group of kids play. His usual calm demeanor seemed intact, but inside, he felt a growing sense of unease. The weight of the project, the responsibility, the constant media attention, the unrelenting challenges was beginning to wear on him. He had always prided himself on staying grounded, but this was different. It wasn't just about him anymore. Every child's laughter, every parent's hopeful smile, felt like a reminder of the stakes. He couldn't fail them. But the pressure to be everything for everyone was becoming overwhelming. As the game ended, Louis, the spirited boy Keanu had bonded with, ran up to him. "Mr. Reeves, did you see my goal?" Keanu smiled, crouching down to meet Louis's eyes. "I saw it. That was amazing. You're getting better every day." Louis beamed. "Do you think I could play professionally someday?" Keanu hesitated, his heart aching at the boy's innocent hope. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," he said finally. "But remember, it's not just about the goal. It's about the journey." Louis nodded, even though Keanu wasn't sure he fully understood. As the boy ran off, Keanu realized he was giving advice he needed to take himself. He had been so focused on the end result that he had forgotten to appreciate the journey. At the same time, Vivian found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror of her penthouse suite. The woman who looked back at her was familiar but different. Her signature elegance was still there, but there was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't shown in years. The gala she had planned to raise funds for the next phase of the expansion was just days away, but for the first time in her life, Vivian wasn't concerned about the spotlight. Instead, she was consumed with doubt. She had poured her heart into this project, but was it enough? She thought back to the town hall meeting in the rural community, where a woman had asked her what she stood to gain. The question still haunted her. Was she doing this for the right reasons, or was it still about proving something to herself and the world? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Amanda, her ever-loyal assistant. "Everything's ready for the gala," Amanda said. "But you don't look excited. What's wrong?" Vivian sighed, sinking onto the edge of her bed. "Do you ever feel like No matter what you do, it's not enough. Amanda sat beside her. Vivian, what you've done here is incredible. You've changed lives. That's more than enough. Vivian shook her head. But what if it's not? What if this is just a band-aid on a much bigger problem? Amanda smiled gently. Then you keep going. You don't have to solve everything at once. You just have to keep trying. Sarah, too, was grappling with her own doubts. Sitting in her small office at the original center, she stared at a pile of paperwork. The accusations of financial mismanagement had been disproven, but the experience had shaken her. She had always been driven by passion, but now she felt the weight of the bureaucracy, the politics, the constant need to prove herself. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a text from her younger sister, Emma. Haven't seen you in months. Come over for dinner. Sarah's chest tightened. She had been so consumed with the project that she had neglected her family, her friends, even herself. She typed a quick reply, can't tonight, maybe soon, and set the phone down with a sigh. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. Is this what success looks like? She whispered to herself. The night of the gala arrived, and the event was as grand as expected. The city's elite filled the ballroom, their laughter and chatter creating a lively hum. Vivian, dressed in a stunning emerald gown, floated through the crowd, charming donors and rallying support. Keanu, ever humble, stayed in the background, greeting guests with quiet sincerity. As the night progressed, the trio found themselves together on the balcony, overlooking the city lights. You clean up well, Vivian teased Keanu, though her tone was softer than usual. Keanu chuckled. And you never stop working a room. Vivian smirked. Someone has to. Sarah leaned against the railing, her gaze distant. Do you ever wonder if we're doing enough? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Keanu was the first to respond. All the time, he admitted. But I think that doubt means we care. If we ever stop asking that question, that's when we should worry. Vivian nodded slowly. I've spent my whole life chasing something. Validation, maybe. But now, I just want this to matter. It does, Sarah said, her voice firm. It matters to every child, every family we've helped. And it matters to us. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared journey settling between them. Then Vivian broke the tension with a laugh. Look at us, getting all sentimental. We're supposed to be celebrating. Keanu smiled. Maybe this is how we celebrate, by reminding ourselves why we started. The gala raised millions, enough to fund the next phase of the expansion and provide additional resources for the existing centers. But more importantly, it reignited the trio's resolve. They realized that the doubts, the challenges, the sleepless nights, they were all part of the journey. The next day, Keanu returned to the urban site, where construction was nearing completion. He picked up a hammer and joined the workers, his presence a quiet reminder that leadership wasn't about standing above, it was about standing with. Vivian drove back to the rural town, where she met with local volunteers to discuss plans for the center's grand opening. She listened more than she spoke, her once sharp edges softened by the experience. Sarah finally took a night off and had dinner with her sister. As they laughed over childhood memories, Sarah felt a sense of balance she hadn't felt in years. She realized that taking care of herself didn't mean she cared any less about the mission. It meant she could care even more. As the months passed, the new centers opened their doors, bringing hope and opportunity to even more communities. The journey was far from over, but Keanu, Vivian, and Sarah knew they were stronger together. And in the quiet moments, when doubt crept in, they reminded themselves of a simple truth. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens one step, one act of kindness, one life at a time. Legacy of Hope. A year had passed since the original community center opened its doors, and in that time, 2 more centers had been built. The urban and rural sites were now flourishing, each uniquely tailored to their communities. What began as a single beacon of hope had evolved into a network of opportunity. But the journey was far from over, and the lessons learned along the way had shaped the trio in ways they could never have imagined. A day of reflection. The anniversary of the original center's opening was a major event, and preparations were underway for a celebration that would bring together everyone who had been part of the journey. Keanu Reeves arrived early, as he always did, dressed in his usual understated style, jeans and a simple jacket. The courtyard buzzed with activity as volunteers set up decorations, while children rehearsed performances they had prepared for the event. Keanu walked through the library, which had become the beating heart of the center. The shelves were now packed with books, many donated by local families. A mural on the wall depicted children from the community, painted by local artists. He ran his fingers over the spines of the books, feeling the energy of the space. This wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing testament to what could happen when people came together. He found Louis sitting at a table, poring over a science book. The boy's focus was intense, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey, Louis," Keanu said, pulling up a chair. "What are you working on?" Louis looked up, grinning. "I'm learning about space. Did you know there are billions of galaxies?" Keanu smiled. "I did. Pretty amazing, isn't it?" Louis nodded eagerly. "Do you think I could ever become an astronaut?" Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady and sincere. "I think you can become anything you want, Louis. Just remember, it starts with believing in yourself." Louis beamed at the words, and Keanu felt a surge of pride. This was why he had poured himself into this project, not for recognition, but for moments like these. Vivian's transformation. Across town, Vivian Leclerc stood in her penthouse, staring at a framed newspaper article on her wall. The headline read, "From Socialite to Philanthropist: How Vivian Leclerc Became a Force for Good." The article had been written months ago, but it still felt surreal to see her name associated with something meaningful. Amanda entered the room, holding a clipboard. "The car's ready, and the press is already gathering at the center." Vivian nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "Do you think they'll ever stop doubting me?" Amanda hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe. But does it matter? You've proven it to yourself. That's what counts." Vivian smiled back, grateful for Amanda's unwavering support. She had come a long way from the woman who once cared only about her image. The work she had done with the community centers had given her a sense of purpose she never knew she needed. Arriving at the center, she was greeted with applause and hugs from the children and families she had come to know. She had traded designer gowns for practical outfits, but for the first time, she felt truly beautiful, not because of how she looked, but because of the impact she was making. Sarah's legacy. Sarah Miller stood at the podium, addressing the crowd that had gathered for the anniversary celebration. Her voice was strong, but her eyes shimmered with emotion. "When we opened this center a year ago, I couldn't have imagined the journey we would embark on," she began. "This place started as a dream, but it has become so much more. It's a sanctuary, a place where children can dream big and families can find support. And none of it would have been possible without all of you." She looked at Keanu and Vivian, seated in the front row. "To Keanu and Vivian, your generosity, your dedication, your belief in this mission have changed lives. And to everyone here today, thank you for trusting us, for believing in us, and for being part of this journey." The crowd erupted into applause, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. This wasn't just her dream anymore. It belonged to everyone. A surprising revelation. After the speeches, Keanu, Vivian, and Sarah found themselves in a quiet corner of the courtyard, watching the celebration unfold. Children ran past, laughing and playing, while parents mingled and shared stories. "You know," Sarah said, her voice contemplative, "I've been thinking about what's next." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Next? Haven't we done enough?" Sarah smiled. "We've done a lot, but there's always more to do. What if we took this model and shared it with other cities, other countries? We could create a movement." Vivian nodded slowly. "It's ambitious, but I like it. If we've learned anything, it's that people are hungry for hope. We just have to give them the tools to create it. Keanu leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. It's a big idea, but I think we've proven we're capable of big ideas. Sarah grinned. So, are we doing this? Keanu and Vivian exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. Let's do it, they said. The legacy lives on. As the day turned into evening, the celebration wound down, but the sense of hope lingered in the air. Keanu, Vivian, and Sarah stood together, looking out at the community they had helped build. This isn't just a project anymore, Vivian said, her voice filled with emotion. It's a legacy. Keanu nodded. And it's not ours. It belongs to them. Sarah smiled, her heart full. To think it all started with a simple idea, a place for kids to feel safe, to dream. They stood in silence for a moment, soaking in the magnitude of what they had accomplished. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready. Together, they had proven that kindness, determination, and unity could change the world. As the last rays of sunlight faded, they made a silent vow to keep going, to build, to inspire, to hope. For this was only the beginning. The story didn't end that night. It lived on in the laughter of the children, the resilience of the families, and the quiet determination of 3 people who dared to believe that change was possible. And as they walked away from the center, they knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together.